Every single week, Hamster's Arcade Archive series gets a new release of a classic title from ages past, and more often than not, it's a shmup. So what was on tap last month? Were they cool enough to sink more time into? Were they fresh enough to do more than credit feed through? Were they worth our time, or will they end up being forgotten again? Compared to September, October was a slow month for ACA Shooting with just 2 releases, but what we got was definitely noteworthy. Namco's Burning Force and the triple-screened version of
Darius II.
Here we go again with that freaking title.
Reactions on the radar. Recognize code 3 distance 12,000.
Developed by Taito and released to arcades in 1989,
Darius II.
saw release in a couple of different flavors, while generally represented and recognized with a 2-screen setup which prominently featured in the
Darius
Cosmic Collection. The more uncommon 3-screen setup, similar to its direct predecessor, is far less commonly seen. It's this version that saw release to the Arcade Archives line for Nintendo Switch and PlayStation 4 on October 6, 2023. While many versions of
Darius II.
would be released to many home consoles over the years, the ACA version of
Darius II.
is the only triple-screen representation of the game that has seen a home release. Let's take a closer look. We've taken a look at many games in the Darius series over the years, and Darius II follows the series formula faithfully. Its 8-way movement feels pretty good, and its 2-button setup for the Silverhawk's main shots and bomb fire work well. Rapid fire is available in the options, though variable fire rates are also separately present as part of the ACA release. Collecting crests left behind from clearing certain enemy formations will boost your offensive power. The Silverhawk's weapons will rise through 7 stages of power depending on the colors obtained. Red for shots, green for bombs, and yellow for lasers. There's even a rare rainbow pickup that can upgrade all of these systems at once by 1 level. For defense, picking up a blue crest will grant a shield that allows for a few enemy shots to be absorbed before being disabled, and it too can be upgraded through a couple of levels, with the gold shield even allowing safety from terrain collision. If the player dies though, they'll be reduced to just the basic shot and bomb. This kind of Gradius Syndrome power reduction can be crippling in later stages, which obviously encourages better play, and a lot of memorization. Of course, care should also be taken. Pickups always drift to the top of the screen, and if there's no ceiling to catch them, they'll drift off the play area and be lost forever. As a super wide Yoko shooter, you'd think that Darius II would be easier to play than the others in the series with less horizontal travel, but that's not really the case. In fact, the triple screen variant is generally regarded as much more difficult, and there's a couple of reasons behind this, I think. Most obviously is the amount of space available in the play area. Sure, you can see stuff way down the line, and you'd think that would give you more than enough time to react. But in actuality, not only will enemies travel way faster than you might anticipate, they'll also fire way further down the line with a shot velocity to match. Because of the vast distances, this can make a lot of shots hard to parse, and paired with questionable shot visibility in places can lead to a swift death in no time at all. Because of this, I usually hung around the middle of the screen. Thankfully, there are giant bombs sprinkled through many of the stages you'll progress through, which can clear the screen of enemies and their shots, and can even heavily damage or outright kill bosses. Just the right timing can make for an extremely helpful screen clear in some tricky areas. Like others in the series, Darius II plays over the course of 7 stages with branching paths that create enormous possibilities for repeat play. With stages lettered from A to Z, some stages will be easier to manage than others depending on the player, and discovering the best route through the game is half the fun. The interrupt save feature is once again super helpful for practicing sticky areas, but we really wish more slots could be added for future releases, and maybe patch into older ones, that would be swell. For a game like Darius II, it would be super helpful. Various other game options and tweaks are, of course, also available as part of the ACA package, including difficulty, lives, controls, and more. All in all, Darius as a series is one I'd like to get better at, and while Darius II is maybe not as optimal an entry to do so, it's still one that I like diving into every now and again.
Reactions on the radar. Recognize code 3
The scoring system here is pretty straightforward. Basically, as entire enemy formations are destroyed, a bonus will be awarded depending on the enemies in question that are destroyed. In addition to the occasional one-up item, a number of score extends can also be obtained, which will definitely help in later stages. As always, the ACA version also features various online leaderboards for the main game, as well as a more stringent score attack mode and the ever-popular timed caravan mode. While Darius Gaiden seems to be hailed as the best in the series, a sentiment I hold myself, Darius II is up there for me as well in terms of its presentation. Well, the two-screened one anyway. While I generally like the idea of having a triple-screened version available on the home scene, it's so heavily letterboxed that it makes things really hard to see in general. Just as we saw with Darius Burst ACEX Plus. Not, by the way, the PlayStation and PC's CS version, keep that in mind. This feels like it'd be a much better fit on PC, and let's be honest, having ACA on PC would be incredible. Since the PS4 and Switch both have no multi-monitor support, nor does it feature the zoom function of the Saturn's Darius II, this is as good as it gets, unfortunately. Of course, there's nothing quite as iconic throughout the entire Darius series as the first stage's opening track.
I always wanted a thing called tuna sashimi.
3, 2, 1.
Generally speaking, the music and sound effects in Darius II are pretty good, not to mention instantly recognizable against the rest of the series. As an ACA release, Darius II also has a number of sound and visual tweaks, including scan lines, smoothing filters, and more, but nothing beats raw pixels and default stereo sound for me. So what are my final thoughts on Darius II? Let's take a look. With tight control, a serious challenge, and a huge amount of replayability, Darius II is a game that's designed for extensive play. That alone is credit feed worthy, but it also dares me to get better for that coveted full run 1cc. Its visuals and sound are also great and iconic, they're just a little too small to really see clearly. And while I do prefer the two-screen version found in the Darius Cosmic Collection, this three-screen version has a much simpler approach when it comes to getting into the action. And getting a quick caravan round in for good measure. It's a good time despite the heightened difficulty. Developed by Namco and released to arcades in 1989, Burning Force seems at a glance to be Namco's take on Sega's superscalar games, albeit with its own twists and quirks. It would later be ported to the Mega Drive and Genesis in 1990, with the arcade version appearing on the Wii Virtual Console only in Japan in 2009. It would finally make its way to the PlayStation 4 and Switch on October 26, 2023 as part of the ACA series. Let's take a closer look. Taking on the role of Cadet Hiromi Tengenji, your job in Burning Force is to attempt combat trials to graduate as a spacefighter pilot. It almost feels as if rail shooters, or Z-scrollers as I like to call them, typically don't have much mechanical variety in the grand scheme of things, but Burning Force does a few neat things within the confines of its gameplay. There are 4 parts to each of Burning Force's first 5 areas called days, which are broken up between surface and air phases. On the surface, you can only move left or right. But holding up or down on the control lever will increase or decrease Hiromi's air bike, called the sign duck. Jumping isn't manual, but many ramps and boosters will allow Hiromi to launch the sign duck into the air to collect certain power-ups and clear some obstacles. Enemies will not only approach from the front, but also the rear. Enemies coming in from behind will be indicated by an alert siren, which does a good job of letting you know there's something back there. Colliding with an enemy will force the sign duck to screech to a halt, resulting in a loss of mobility while things get back up to speed. But by the same token, enemies colliding with the rear of the sign duck will also launch it forward. Getting hit by a shot or missile, though, that will result in the loss of a ship. Given that many of the shots that are fired by enemies are aimed at where you might be heading, this can sometimes be problematic, so knowing where enemies are coming from, their movement behaviors, and how they fire will be key in making it through as unscathed as possible. Managing the ground speed of the sign duck will also help in avoiding many of the shots fired your way. The Sign Duck is armed with a forward-firing blaster and a limited stock of missiles to start, but these can be switched out or, in the case of missiles, replenished by collecting various power-ups represented by a variety of lettered spheres. Wide shots have great horizontal range, while lasers cut through dense columns of enemies. A third weapon, the cross laser, is a great amalgamation of the two. If a ship is lost though, these weapons are lost and replaced with just the basic blaster. Two types of missiles also exist, white for homing and red for a bomber with an area effect. Regardless of the one picked up, the stock will fill back up to 5. An enterprising player will crack off a missile before picking one of these up, allowing for a little bit of free crowd control. It's like free real estate, but with missiles. All of these rules generally apply to the third and fourth phases of each area, where the Sign Duck gets a plain-style shell. This allows for full-range movement, but no speed control. While smaller sub-bosses cap off the first two phases, the third phase will feature an area boss battle, after which a bonus stage will round out the day. In the case of Area 6, only one phase exists, and it's all area. On the whole, there isn't really much complexity to Burning Force, but while it's not exactly very technical, it is very hard. I found that enemy shots are very plentiful, and it was really easy to get cornered and boxed in, which of course resulted in a rather easy loss of a ship. This is especially frustrating with enemies that fly higher than the airbike phase can reach, or from enemies firing as soon as they appear on screen from behind. A 1cc here is going to be an extreme challenge, but even credit feeding is super difficult. Players will still need to overcome the entire stage they made it to progress, and that means taking on what is often a cluttered gauntlet of obstacles and bullets. I don't know if I'd call it especially fun from Area 4 onward, all told, but with the extra scoring modes in the Arcade Archives release, there's at least a little more incentive to get better further down the line. With extends happening at various intervals starting at 80,000 points, a few things should be kept in mind regarding the score in Burning Force outside of the typical points from enemy destruction. Specifically, a timer found in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen will constantly count down as you make your way through any particular phase. The higher this number is when the phase ends, the better the stage end bonus will be. This should emphasize getting through as fast as possible while also colliding with as few obstacles as you can. The fourth phase of each day is also a dedicated bonus stage, tasking you with collecting as many orbs as possible, each with their own values. A number of barriers will appear to impede progress, but following the trail as closely as possible should get you through without much trouble. If you collect them all, you'll get a smooth 10,000 point bonus. Once again, this ACA version comes standard with multiple leaderboards and the aforementioned timed caravan mode, so while the game isn't maybe as great as it could have been, there's at least a good incentive to get better just to see how you stack up on the world stage. In general, for games that are a little more ho-hum, this is the ACA series' greatest strength, I think. Now, while Burning Force is mostly plain and its length a bit extreme, the presentation to Burning Force comes through in spades. Colorful scaling graphics, cool, sometimes trippy backgrounds, and some fantastic pixel art are pretty easy on the eyes. But the real standout here is Burning Force's soundtrack. As another System 2 release, it's no surprise it sounds good, but Yoshinori Kawamoto's compositions are almost as good as Shinji Hosoe's work in Dragon Saber. Almost. It's so good. Ultimately, the soundtrack is what led me to push through the game, with an interrupt save here and a credit dump there. Completely worth the more difficult credit feed and frequent cheap shots. The music is super, super good. So there we have it, Burning Force. Let's dip into my final thoughts. Burning Force controls well enough, though later stages are maybe a bit more crowded and hectic for what the player is able to perform. It's also quite a bit longer than your typical shooter. It kind of overstays its welcome due to some of the more needlessly hard bits later down the line. Meanwhile, its colorful visuals look fantastic, and it has one of the best soundtracks of its time. Those Namco System 2 boards are no joke. On the one hand, its stunted fun factor left me feeling pretty frustrated. On the other, its soundtrack absolutely carries the game way past the point of being traditionally fun. So I guess it lands kind of in the middle of the road. Knowing what I know now, I probably would have just gotten the OST on CD instead. So, it's November, and the first SCG of the month has already been released. Athena's Dio has a lot of neat intricacies that make it, at minimum, a decent conversation starter. What more will we see this month? We'll have to wait and find out. Meanwhile, I'm also hard at work at getting that Trouble Witches feature ready to go, which I hope is going to be real soon because the recently released Air Twister is finally pushing me to open and set up that PS5 I got a couple months ago. Until then, we'll see you all in the next episode. As another System 2 release, it's no surprise that it sounds good, but Yoshinori Kawamoto's competitions are Dragon Saber, something something. It's good.